Floowandereeze is making its way to the Master Duel meta, so we're going to be taking a closer look at how this deck works, and hopefully giving you the knowledge to learn how to play it and beat it. Floowandereeze is unique in that this deck does not special summon at all, and as a result, they don't really care about their extra deck. Your level 1 monsters create a large series of back-to-back extra normal summons that end up in powerful tribute summoned boss monsters. Now, let's look at the 4 different level 1 monsters that we run. Specifically, what's the same between them? They all share a few commonalities. First is that they're all level 1 Winged Beast monsters. The other is a non-once per turn effect where if any of these face-up monsters leave the field, they are banished instead of going to the graveyard. Then they have 2 other effects, each with a hard once per turn. When a Floowandereeze level 1 is normal summoned, they perform a certain beneficial action, then allowing you to make an additional normal summon after that effect resolves. The normal summon that you make happens immediately after that effect, or you lose it forever. The additional normal summon is also part of the beneficial effect. If a Floowandereeze would add a card from deck to hand and it gets ashed, you lose the additional normal summon as well as that search. Their other effect activates if a Winged Beast monster is summoned while they're in the banish pile. Once per turn, they can add themselves back to your hand if a Winged Beast monster is normal summoned. Both of these effects have another condition, in that if they're activated, you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn. But we don't really care about that. We summon like 4 times a turn, but they're all normal summons. The only real variation between the Floowandereeze level 1s is the beneficial effect they gain before the additional normal summon. Now, let's take a closer look at the individual Floowandereeze and what unique benefit they gain. Floowandereeze Rabina is your main man. You always want to see this guy in your opening hand, or a way to get to him. When Rabina is normal summoned, you can add any level 4 or lower Winged Beast monster from your deck to your hand before gaining your additional normal summon. This mostly searches your other level 1 Floowandereeze, with Floowandereeze Eaglin being your highest priority target. When Floowandereeze Eaglin is normal summoned, he adds a level 7 or higher Winged Beast monster to your hand. Eaglin is vital to the strategy, and that Eaglin is what's going to be searching our big payoffs to all these normal summon chains. The other 2 guys aren't that important, but they're still kind of useful. Floowandereeze Stree needs to banish 1 card from either player's graveyard before you can get your additional normal summon, and Floowandereeze Toucan needs to add back a banished Floowandereeze card. Now, for all 4 of these cards, you need to be able to meet their conditions before getting your additional normal summon. So if there's no card in either player's graveyard, Stree can't get his additional normal summon. And if there's no banished Floowandereeze card, you can't get Toucan's extra normal summon. Now let's look at the payoffs that we get with Floowandereeze Eaglin. Floowandereeze Empan is the level 8 archetypal boss monster that we run. Empan has a few noticeable differences from the level 1 Floowandereeze monsters. First off, Empan doesn't get banished if he leaves the field, and he has no way to add himself back to your hand like the other Floowandereezes do. If you want to recur Empan, you need to banish him with Stree, and then add him back with Toucan. Empan can continue your normal summons by adding another Floowandereeze spell or trap, but we usually only want the trap and don't continue our normal summons unless we have another boss monster in our hand to go for. Empan's biggest draw is his soft floodgate effect. As long as Empan is on the field, special summoned monsters your opponent controls cannot activate any of their effects if they're in attack position. This turns off any link monster and makes it way harder for your opponent to clean up your board or swing for lethal while playing around it. His other effect activates if Empan attacks or is attacked. You can banish any card from your hand to have the other monster's attack and defense. The trap card we run and the ideal target for Empan on turn 1 is Floowandereeze and the Dreaming Town. Dreaming Town lets you normal summon a level 4 or lower Winged Beast monster during either player's main phase. This lets us start our Rabina or Eaglin lines during our opponent's turn and is the centerpiece to our deck. By this point, we already have the basic building blocks for our 1-card combo. If we normal summon Rabina, we can activate their effect. Rabina allows us to search Eaglin from our deck to our hand, who can then normal summon. With Eaglin's effect, we can add our Empan. Empan requires 2 tributes, so we tribute both Rabina and Eaglin to tribute summon him. At this point, 3 effects activate at the same time. Empan is going to be able to add a Floowandereeze spell or trap, and our now banished Rabina and Eaglin also activate their effects to add themselves back to the hand, because a Winged Beast monster was just normal summoned. So, we have a Rabina Eaglin line set up for our opponent's turn, but a second Empan isn't going to do much, so let's take a look at our other payoffs. One of the big ones is Ryza the Mega Monarch. This guy is an absolute bomb when he drops on the field. Ryza can be searched with Eaglin, and similar to Empan, he requires 2 tributes. and when he is tribute summoned, you can target 3 cards in a specific order. The first is a card on the field, the second is a card in either player's graveyard, and the third is another target on the field. The first 2 cards you targeted, so the one on the field and in the graveyard, get stacked on the opponent's deck in whatever order you want. The third card you targeted on the field gets returned to the hand. That third target is also any card on the field, including your own cards like Mega Ryza himself. Since Ryza is a soft once per turn, if you can find another way to get him out on the field, you can proc his effect twice. Or you can just put him back in your hand to use on the crackback to break their board again. There is a minor stipulation in that to get the third targeting effect, you need to tribute a wind monster for Mega Ryza's summon, which shouldn't be hard because most of our monsters are wind, with the only waters being Rabina and Stream. Another target we can search with Eaglin is Mist Valley Apex Avian. You might be familiar with this card from Tri-Brigade Lyrilisc. Apex Avian is an Omni-Negate that activates by returning himself to the hand. He once again lacks a card once per turn on his effect, so if you can get him on the field again in the same turn, you can use his negate again. The last boss monster we run is Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. Barrier Statue prevents any non-wind monsters from being special summoned. Now, Barrier Statue is unique in that it's only level 4 and it doesn't require any tributes. This means you can't search it with Eaglin, but you can search it with Rabina. When the M-Pen comes down, we usually don't use his additional normal summon to extend, but if we have the Barrier Statue in hand, this is probably the best time to bring him down. To recap, all of these payoffs can be searched by taking the Rabina Eaglin line during our opponent's turn using Dreaming Town. The last cards in our engine are all spell cards, so let's take a look at them. Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map is our field spell that has 2 effects, one on our turn and one on our opponent's turn. On our turn, we can reveal any level 1 Floowandereeze monster, banish a Floowandereeze monster from our deck, then get an additional normal summon, specifically for the Floowandereeze that we revealed from our hand. The Floowandereeze that we banish can then be added to our hand because the Floowandereeze that we normal summon is a winged beast. This also helps extend with an additional normal summon if need be. During the opponent's turn, Magnificent Map lets us normal summon if your opponent normal summons a monster. This lets us start our series of normal summons with any Floowandereeze. Floowandereeze and the Unexplored Winds is a continuous spell that gives us a ton of utility for breaking boards and fixing our hands sometimes. If you were to tribute a monster that requires 2 tributes, like M-Pen, you can use 1 card your opponent controls for the tribute summon instead. Now this is 1 card, not 1 monster. And this card doesn't target. This means your opponent can lose their cards without getting a chance to respond to the summon, similar to a Kaiju. But this time it is tied to a spell card and they do have a chance to react to the spell card being activated. Its other effect is during your main phase. You can put up to 2 winged beast cards from your hand back into your deck, then draw however many you put back. This card essentially gives you a mulligan for winged beasts, hopefully getting some hand traps instead of a bunch of Eaglins that you don't need. If Master Duel is following the physical release as closely as they have been, Floowandereeze and the Advent of Adventure won't be in the initial support, but I wanted to be in this video for completion's sake. Advent of Adventure banishes any winged beast monster from our hand or on our field to add any Floowandereeze monster or the Floowandereeze field spell Magnificent Map to our hand. Not only is this another way to find the Floowandereeze names that we need in our hand, it's also a quick play spell, so it has utility in helping our combos avoid certain hand traps or other types of disruption. If a card is targeting your Floowandereeze monster, Advent of Adventure can be chained to the activation to banish the card being targeted. When the chain resolves, the targeted card will no longer be on the field, and the card targeting it will resolve without effect. Cards like Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence are the 2 biggest cards that target to stop your combos that Advent of Adventure can stop. Ash Blossom notably does not target, so Advent won't save you there. Our staple lineup is also going to be a bit more flexible than usual. Because our extra deck is basically worthless, we can run a ton of pot cards. Pot of Extravagance, Pot of Prosperity, and Pot of Duality have 0 conflicts in our deck and make it way more consistent. I'm personally running 2 of each because it's funny, but the ratios of these pot cards are all preferences. Lists run anywhere from 5 to 8 pot cards in total, all with different ratios for each pot. So experiment and see what works for you. Floowandereeze is also able to run Dimension Shifter, the only hand trap that can rival how strong Max C is. If you have no cards in your graveyard, you can discard D-Shifter, and until the end of the next turn, all cards sent to the graveyard are banished instead. Depending on the matchup, your opponent might have to straight up skip their turn. We don't care about our graveyard, so this has 0 conflicts with the rest of our deck. Keep in mind any spell cards you use will be sent to the graveyard, and it will turn D-Shifter off, so make sure to fire it off before activating your spell cards. Dimension Shifter's Floodgate is notable in the fact that it can turn off certain hand traps. If a card specifically says it needs to be sent to the graveyard as part of its cost, they cannot be activated under D-Shifter. This is different from a card that says it has to be discarded for cost. A list of common hand traps or staples that can't be activated under Dimension Shifter should be shown on the screen right now. Two of the more notable ones are Drool and Lockbird and Effect Veiler, both of which can normally single-handedly end a Floowandereeze turn. Under D-Shifter, they're basically dead cards in your opponent's hand. Now, we do still run Max C, even though it can't be activated under Dimension Shifter, and we do this because Max C is a win condition and a very unfair card. The anti-synergy with D-Shifter is not a good reason to cut this card because it can still just automatically win you games by resolving. This also applies to Called by the Grave. Under D-Shifter, cards like Ash Blossom get banished instead of going to the graveyard, so Called by just doesn't work. However, Called by the Grave is a very broken and skillless card that can bypass having to think about how to play around your opponent's interaction, so don't cut this from your lists, even though it might be tempting. So now, we can take a look at the sample deck list. The extra deck doesn't really matter at all. The one I provided here has a Zeus line with Assembled Nightingale who can attack directly. This is for very infrequent edge cases where you can actually make a rank 1 Xyz summon without getting special summon locked. The rest of the deck are even more unlikely edge cases for the exact scenario where your opponent uses Dogmatica Maximus, which forces both players to send 2 cards from the extra deck to the graveyard. All of these monsters have beneficial effects when they're sent to the graveyard, like Elder Entity Entis, but they are really, really not necessary. Even the Zeus line doesn't happen that often, so feel free to completely fill this extra deck with junk. It is 100% optional. I also want to go over cards that might not make their way into the standard Floowandereeze lists, but are options that they can reasonably run. Book of Moon is bad. If Advent of Adventure is in the game, cut this card and do not look back. If it isn't in the game, we're unfortunately relying on this card until Advent comes out. It serves a similar niche in that it can make any card being targeted not considered on the field when it resolves, but we don't get nearly as much value out of it as we do Advent of Adventure. Floowandereeze has a real big going second problem, which is why Dark Ruler No More might be a good option if you see a lot of combo-heavy decks. Dark Ruler No More negates all of your opponent's monster effects on the field, and your opponent is unable to respond to this card with monster effects, so they can't negate it with a Borreload Savage Dragon or something. Harpy's Featherstorm is a high-roll going first option. If you control a winged beast monster, so literally anything on our deck, for the entire turn, any monster effect your opponent activates is negated. It is a mini True King of all calamities. This card is incredibly sacky and will give you more auto-win games, but it will also break your going second hands more often too. Since our extra deck is basically worthless, we can make use of it in other ways. Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries is a niche hand trap where you can reveal a card in your extra deck to banish all cards in your opponent's extra deck with the same name as the card that you revealed. You can get rid of Tri-Brigade's Shuri Eggs, take out your preferred suit from Strikers, or take Rusty Bardiche out of Phantom Knights. Now, there are a ton of matchups where this card will be completely dead, and it takes a ton of URs to craft everything you need for this card, and it's really inconsistent. I wouldn't recommend it, but I think it is worth mentioning because it is really funny if this card resolves. Before we move on to beating Floowandereeze, I want to take a minute to look at chain blocking. Chain blocking is an unofficial term to describe the interaction between a few gameplay mechanics. If multiple card effects meet their condition to be activated at the same time, the player who controls those cards are able to add them to the chain in whatever order they want to before the opponent can respond. For a concrete example of how this is done, let's say that we have a Rabina and a Magnificent Map, and our opponent has an Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. We use Magnificent Map's effect to reveal Rabina and banish a Stree from our deck. By Map's effect, we can then immediately normal summon our Rabina, and at this point we have 2 effects that activate at the same time. Rabina's effect to add a card from the deck to the hand, and Stree's effect to add itself back to the hand from the banish pile because a winged beast monster was normal summoned. If we make our Rabina Chainlink 1 and our Stree Chainlink 2, then our opponent cannot stop our Rabina with Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. The reason for this is because certain cards like Ash Blossom or Ciphering Gear Gamma can only negate the most recent card in the chain link. So if Rabina's effect to add from deck to hand is Chainlink 1, and Stree's effect to add itself back to the hand is Chainlink 2, the only effect that our opponent can respond to with something like Ash Blossom or Gamma is the Stree that's banished, not the Rabina, because the Stree is the most recent card in the chain. Floowandereeze has a ton of scenarios where multiple effects activate at the same time. For example, if you tribute summon N-Pen by tributing both Rabina and Eaglin, all 3 monsters' effects activate at the same time. Cards that don't respond to effects being activated, but instead target cards on the field to activate their effects, cannot be chain blocked. This includes cards like Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence. The general rule of thumb is that effects you care about the most that you want to resolve should be first in the chain link, while the effects you care about least should be the last one. Now, if you think chain blocking is really cool and you think there aren't already enough ways to chain block Rabina in your deck already, you might want to consider the Smorg package. I'm not too familiar with this package, and I didn't see much success of it in the TCG, so I'm going to be linking a video in the description that goes over this variant in depth if you're interested. Now, how do we beat these guys? Let's look at how the meta hand trap lineup interacts with Floowandereeze. If Ash Blossom is your only hand trap, you're kind of in a lose-lose scenario where you have to make a 50-50 read based on zero information. Stopping Eaglin is technically ideal, but it's pretty likely that one of the insane pot cards comes down before the Eaglin. This deck runs so many pot cards that it kind of maximizes their chances of finding an anti-hand trap card like Call by the Grave or Advent of Adventure. So your choice is to either stop the pot or wait to stop the Eaglin. There's no real correct decision here. I typically stop it if it's Pot of Extravagance, but I let the Prosperity resolve. My logic here is that against Floowandereeze, there's a way higher chance that they find an anti-hand trap card like Called by the Grave with the 2 draws they get off Extravagance than the chance that they opened one. And against Eldritch, Extravagance is really just the best target. But if a Prosperity comes down instead, it's possible that the deck they're playing has higher value targets to Ash, like Alistair the Invoker or Nadir's Servant. It's also worth noting that this deck does basically the same combo on your turn as theirs, so having 2 Ashes is actually pretty good against this deck. If you can stop the normal summons on your turn, that's most of their disruption out of the way. Again, in this case, I would save your disruption for Eaglin. Infinite Impermanence and Effectivelo's best target for stopping the opponent's combo is also Eaglin. We really don't want them finding their big boss monsters. With Imperm specifically, if you don't think you can play through an M-Pen with your hand, you should probably save it to break their board instead of running the gamble of them being able to dodge the Imperm with an Advent or a book. Max C and Nibiru are both completely dead cards against this deck. This deck never special summons, so Max C does nothing, and any hand that Floowandereeze has that goes over 5 summons is almost always putting the barrier statue down. When the barrier statue is on the field, Nibiru can't even attempt to activate his effect because Nibiru would have to special summon itself, and Nibiru is a light. Even though Ghost Ogre is unable to be activated under D-Shifter, it's really solid against this deck. As usual, Eaglin is a good hit, but we can also hit the field spell. Hitting the field spell, Magnificent Map, gets us more value here overall. It turns off one of their options for chain blocking, extending, and interacting on your turn. Ghost Ogre has another cool niche interaction in this matchup, where you can stop Apex Avian's negation effect. Apex Avian needs to return itself to the hand to negate anything, but if Ghost Ogre is chained and it destroys the Apex Avian, nothing gets negated because the Apex Avian never returned to the hand. Droll and Lockbird can shut this deck down provided that you aren't under D-Shifter. The deck really can't put up a boss monster consistently under it. Droll and Lock also avoids a lot of their anti-hand trap cards. Advent isn't going to help you, Magnificent Map isn't going to help you, and no amount of chain blocking is going to help you against this card. Artifact Lancia prevents any cards from being banished. This overwrites D-Shifter's banishing effect. You can hold this card in your hand so you can play under D-Shifter going second, or you can use it on their turn to turn them off of their Floowandereeze cards going back to their hand. If you're playing with your friends or something, and you know that your opponent is playing Floowandereeze, you should drop Lancia in the draw or standby phase. This stops their Extravagances or Prosperities. You can't chain Lancia to either of these cards to stop them because they banish for cost. Ciphering Gear Gamma is also crazy good against this deck. The chain blocks are annoying, but they won't be able to chain block their entire normal summon line. Gamma removes a body for their tribute summons and stops an extra normal summon. Gamma also bypasses every way for this deck to stop your hand traps. You can't call by the Gamma, it activates under D-Shifter, and Advent or Book of Moon don't stop it from negating your effect. Now, for how to break their board, first, let's take a look at how good generic board breakers and going second cards are against this deck. Back row removal, like Lightning Storm, is really good. Being able to force out Dreaming Town early limits them quite a bit. Mainly that they can't go for their Ryza line to completely wipe your board. Quick play spells like Forbidden Droplet or Forbidden Chalice are great. You can opt to stop the M-Pen, or you can save them for whatever they decide to get out with the Dreaming Town. Imperm and Dark Ruler are less good. They mostly can only trade for the M-Pen. If your deck is running Kaijus or Lava Golem, I would recommend swapping out your favorites for Godarla. Because this deck has easy access to Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds, it turns off any non-wind special summons. This includes cards like Gamma Seal and Lava Golem. Finally, let's go over some intricacies of the Floowandereeze cards that you can exploit to break their board. M-Pen only prevents effects from being activated from the monster's special summon attack position. The obvious counterplay here is doing your plays in defense mode if you can, and avoiding lines that extend with link monsters before you can take out the M-Pen. Continuous effects are notably not negated by M-Pen. Effects that don't have a semicolon or a colon in them don't activate at any point, so cards like Zodiac Warbow can still attack directly and threaten a Zeus line. Your normal summon does proc their Magnificent Meh to start their chain of normal summons, so if you don't want a Mega Rise Up blowing up your board or an Apex Avian putting up an additional negate, try to hold your normal summon until you have an answer to this or you can remove the map. Field spells, continuous spells, and continuous traps are unique in that they still need to be on the field to resolve. If they're destroyed before the chain resolves, they do not get their effects. So MST to negate is actually real in these scenarios. If you play a deck running Emergency Teleport, Ghost Ogre can actually be activated from the field as well as in the hand, which is pretty unique. If Phantom Knights or a Virtual World player has an Emergency Teleport and really wants to start their combo off with a normal summon, you can Emergency Teleport the Ghost Ogre on field and destroy the field spell whenever it activates. If a Floowandereeze starts the series of normal summons, one important factor is that they have to conduct these normal summons sequentially before they can do anything else. If you can threaten their cards before they start these normal summons, they're forced to use their line preemptively. Keep in mind, during their normal summons, you only get a chance to use quick effects while this is happening. There's no opportunity for an open game state in between these. That's about it for Floowandereeze. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I have a video on the adventure engine that I'm either releasing later today or tomorrow. If you have any suggestions for what guide I could make next, please be sure to leave them in the comments. Have a fantastic day.